Hi everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm bringing you another reading. I'm going to be looking at the chart of Elon Musk. And if you don't know who he is the developer of the Tesla electric car. And he's been in the news a bit lately because of the fact that he had suggested he was considering taking the company private. And it created quite a stir with the investors of the company because it is basically not anything that had been discussed prior. He was talking about having secure investors in order to take the company private, which was questionable, and actually now there is potential SEC involvement in kind of investigating whether or not this was really an accurate statement or if it was just something that he kind of said off the cuff, and which ultimately, affected the price of his stock. And, there's rules that say you can't really do these things without forethought and essentially discussion amongst people in the company. So if you want to follow along, Elon was born on June 28th, 1971 in Pretoria, South Africa. And I don't have a birth time for him, so I'm working off of a solar chart, which puts the sun right on the ascendant. Now, to follow up on what I was saying, basically he has since backtracked and said he's not going to be taking the company private. And he said for various reasons, basically probably what I'm thinking happened was that he just got a lot of backlash from current investors and realized he wasn't going to be able to do this. Plus, the investment of the group that was going to help him take it private was in Saudi Arabia, and there was some conflict of interest because Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest oil producers in the world, and that seems to conflict with the idea of producing an electric car. So let's go ahead and look at his natal chart and find out a little bit more about him. He is a Cancer sun at 5 degrees. And the first thing I think of when I think of a Cancer sun, especially a male Cancer sun, Cancer is the first water sign of the zodiac. It has a lot to do with the expression of our emotions and our feelings, because that's what water symbolizes in the chart. And it's a cardinal water sign, which means it's very directed in its action and its assertion. That's what cardinal energy is about. So I see that it can be possibly a little bit challenging to be a male Cancer, because in general, typically, men are supposed to be strong, and they're supposed to be courageous, and they're supposed to be all about, asserting themselves and having confidence. And it's not that Cancer males can't, but it's that they're just coming from a different place, being connected to the emotions and the feelings. And Cancer is the nurturing energy of the zodiac. It's the mothering energy. It wants to give and care for and provide. So in that sense, actually, male Cancers can be great providers, but they have to struggle with this part of themselves that is sensitive. And how can you be sensitive as a male in the world? So what can happen is that Cancer men can sometimes put up guards or put up barriers because they do feel so much that they want to kind of block it out or protect themselves or shield themselves from others who may not understand, or just from allowing others to see their sensitivity, because it's not necessarily as accepted coming from a man per se. Now, what's interesting about his sun is that not only does he have a Cancer sun, but it's squared his Uranus at 9 degrees of Libra, But then it is also squared his Pluto in Virgo at 27 degrees. Now that's a little bit of a bigger square of about 8-degree orb. But this to me speaks to some of the erratic behavior and some of the intense behavior that we've come to see from him. And in the most recent incident, it's, you know, he impulsively, I would think, tweeted that he was going to be taking the company private. You know, that could be a reaction to somebody who's frustrated. And with Cancer energy, sometimes with that emotional frustration that we might feel, it can almost feel like it's boiling up inside of us and we have to do something. You know, that's, the crabs have the pinchers, you know, they want to like lash out a little bit in order to protect themselves because they feel vulnerable. So with the square from that Cancer sun to Uranus in Libra and to Pluto in Virgo, I can imagine that sometimes he gets rather impulsive in the way that he behaves. Uranus is that energy of the unpredictable. It's the energy of change. It's the energy of doing things differently. And then Pluto is the energy of deep transformation and deep, you know, needing to look beneath the surface at things in order to uncover and to transform. But when the energies are in a square to the sun, it can mean that the solar nature or the individuality has difficulty sometimes handling that Uranian and that Plutonian energy. And so with the sun in Cancer, I could imagine that it's like the emotions get a little bit out of hand, and then it kind of surfaces through this unpredictable behavior and through this you know, this Plutonian kind of explosive wanting to just destroy things kind of behavior. And I'm trying to now specify a little bit more what it would be like to have the Uranus in Libra. You know, that has to do with perhaps, you know, thinking that you know the right way, or, you know, because Libra has to do with our thoughts and how we think about things. It too is a cardinal energy. And so it's very directed in its expression, and Libra wants to create harmony and balance, but Uranus in Libra is kind of like, whoa, you know, that's like a very unpredictable energy, a very erratic energy, wanting to express itself in a balanced and harmonious way. So it could still potentially, especially in the square nature to the sun, you know, just be another factor of unpredictableness, you know, in the process of trying to find harmony and balance in the self-expression. The other thing that's interesting about his chart is that he's got Mercury in Cancer. It is widely conjunct his sun. That Mercury is at 13 degrees of Cancer. And then that Mercury also squares his Uranus at 9 degrees of Libra. So Mercury in Cancer, how we communicate in Cancer, sensitively, in a nurturing way, at times possibly, you know, in an elusive way, or in a way that's kind of like trying to figure out, you know, can I trust this situation? Can I trust this other person? You know, it can be a little bit protective of itself in its communicative style. And then again, with that square to Uranus and Libra might think, yeah, I've got the idea. Yeah, this is how we should do it. You know, this is what I think. But when it's in a square position to that Mercury in Cancer, it can just mean sometimes there's perhaps just volatility there, volatile emotions that are expressed through the communication at the same time that you're trying to share, you know, innovative ideas and get others to understand it and to come along with it. So there can just be a challenge there in the communication style as well. Another interesting thing about his chart is that he's got Venus in Gemini at 19 degrees, and it trines Mars in Aquarius at 20 degrees. Now, this is a creative energy to have Venus, the planet of beauty and harmony and loving energy, also our creative expression, trining, making a harmonious aspect to Mars in Aquarius. You know, Mars has to do with how we assert ourselves and our drive and our male strength. And it's in Aquarius. Aquarius, the sign of innovation, the sign of wanting to bring new ideas forth. So this really is a nice harmonious energy in his chart that allows him to really express himself creatively through his ideas, especially with that Venus in Gemini and the Mars in Aquarius. What's also interesting about his chart is that Mars in Aquarius is conjunct his North Node at 15 degrees of Aquarius. So in astrology, the North Node relates to where we're headed in this lifetime. And to have the North Node in Aquarius means that we're really learning about how to operate within groups, how to focus on of humanity, and how to focus on groups and social organizations and social welfare, really. I mean, his sort of the reason that he's in this life, so to speak, is to really bring his focus and his energy on helping the group. And then you've got Mars right there next to it, bringing energy and bringing drive to really want to get things done. It also means that he has his South Node in Leo, suggesting that he's come from a lifetime that's really been focused on himself. And Martin Schulman writes from Karmic Astrology about having the North Node in Aquarius, that through the North Node in Aquarius, we learn to overcome past life sense of prestige and develop the concept of universal brotherhood. We must ultimately come to see ourselves as part of a larger cosmic sphere in which our role is to share in the burden of human evolution. We will reach our highest happiness when we are able to set aside our own needs and substitute in their place a need for a humanitarian attitude toward all he sees around him. So you can get the picture that really he's here to bring his creative innovation to really help progress humanity. And he's certainly doing that in the things that he's chosen to focus his attention on. And by the way, Mars has to do with cars. So I also find it interesting that it's Mars that's conjunct the North Node in the sign of Aquarius. Now, that Mars at 20 degrees of Aquarius also squares a conjunction that he has between Neptune at 0 degrees of Sagittarius and Jupiter at 27 degrees of Scorpio. So to have Neptune and Jupiter conjunct in the chart, Neptune deals with the desire to transcend the ego, the desire to develop our spirituality and to connect with something larger than ourselves. Jupiter is the principle of expansion. It does deal with our philosophies and our, the way that we expand our mental perspective through studying and through, bringing in more information into our minds. This could be somebody who would benefit from a spiritual practice like meditation, something that helps transcend the ego and something that really helps center him. But it is squared that Mars in Aquarius. And sometimes with this kind of square, Mars represents our ego, and Jupiter, the planet of expansion, can just make things bigger. So this could sometimes present a challenge that he really needs to learn how to have compassion and how to, really be more empathetic when it comes to how he asserts himself in relationship to others. And in general, though, it could also give him a very positive outlook and allow him to think really big. Jupiter, think and act really big. Jupiter is that principle of really just not having any boundaries and really wanting to just kind of like grow things as much as possible. And with Neptune there, that can be a very inspired perspective, a very imaginative perspective. And then again, with the square to Mars, how we take action, it can just mean that, you know, he's good at taking risks. He's good at thinking big and attempting to apply those thoughts into his reality. Now, what's also interesting about this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is that it opposes his Saturn at 1 degree of Gemini. And actually, it's a very tight opposition between Saturn at 1 degree of Gemini and Neptune at 0 degrees of Sagittarius. It's a little bit of a wider opposition with the Jupiter. And this suggests that as he does think big and as he does really want to just, you know, imagine all possibilities, Saturn at 1 degree of Gemini kind of reins him in a little bit, wants to really make sure that he keeps things practical and grounded. Sometimes he might encounter this in relationships with others because that's what the opposition symbolize in a chart. It manifests as experiences we have with other people in our lives. So he may, as he's really, you know, thinking big and imagining big, he might be faced with, okay, how do we practically achieve this? You know, always kind of being shown that he needs to ground those ideas in reality. That's what Saturn's all about. And finally, that Saturn at 1 degrees of Sagittarius does trine his Uranus, trine his Pluto. At 27 degrees of Virgo is the Pluto, and 9 degrees of Libra is the Uranus. To have Saturn trine the Pluto suggests that he's capable of really looking at the details of things, because it's Pluto in Virgo, and applying it to how he creates form and structure and works. It really probably gives him a detail-oriented style to how he goes about accomplishing what he's trying to do. And then with the Saturn trining the Uranus, that just means that he's going to be an innovator in what it is that he does with his work. Because again, Uranus is all about something different, and Uranian energy can act, it kind of comes in as insight into our life. It's just, we don't have to think hard per se. It's like an idea that pops into our mind. And then with the trine to the Saturn, he's able and capable of grounding those thoughts and ideas into his work or into whatever it is he's trying to produce. So I want to move on to his transits that have been happening. He's been having transiting Jupiter moving through the sign of Scorpio, squaring that Mars at 20 degrees of Aquarius. And this happened starting in January of 2018, and it completes in September of this year as well. And that perhaps is giving him some inspiration. It's definitely, you know, causing him to have probably, you know, big visions and grand ideas of where things can go and how to apply them through that effort, that drive, which is his Mars in Aquarius. And again, that Mars trines that Venus, stimulating his creative nature. Perhaps it's really helping him to kind of shed some layers, shed some skin around how he does assert himself in these sort of bigger ways. Because again, Jupiter wants to expand and grow, and then the Mars wants to assert. But, you know, Jupiter sometimes has to be reined in, especially with Jupiter in Scorpio. It really wants to take us deep and have us kind of look at ways that we could be operating in some ways very unconsciously, and being asked to kind of look at that. And also, Scorpio really deals with power and how we're using power. And if we're at all using it in a way to manipulate or in a self-serving way, we will be called out about that, especially with Jupiter and Scorpio times. You know, it wants to expand our perspective, but it wants to show us where we might not be exactly, you know, doing it right. And Scorpio energy really is all about thinking of the group. And if we're not doing that, and we're operating on a more self-serving level, Jupiter in Scorpio is going to show us that and ask us to, recalibrate. Now, what also is interesting is that transiting Saturn has been opposing his Sun. Now, again, his Sun is at 5 degrees of Cancer, and Saturn has been moving through Cancer, specifically opposing his Sun starting in February, and it completes in November of 2018, this year. This has probably been very frustrating for him because the solar energy is our individuality, how we want to shine out into the world. And Saturn is limitation. Saturn stops us in our tracks. Saturn holds us back. Saturn holds us accountable and asks us to mature. And again, because it's Saturn moving through an opposition to his Sun, it's going to be bringing up this experience in his relationships with other people. And I see this, directly a result of him being called out when he tweeted that he wanted to take the company private, because the investors basically said, no, you can't do that. That's Saturn, limitation. It's authority figures coming in and saying, we have to slow it down and at least, discuss this and look at the nuts and bolts of how it would even happen. And then he turned around and came out with a statement basically saying, yes, I realize now we can't take the company private, and these are the reasons why. And the future minders write about transiting Saturn opposite the Sun, that obstacles to your development and the goals you seek can emerge during this cycle. People generally, and those in authority particularly, may oppose your will and what you want most. Moving towards an objective, you tend to experience delays in your progress, or you may have to redirect your efforts into other areas if your aim is sufficiently off the mark. And actually, this is reminding me that one of the things he said in his statement when he said that he was no longer thinking of taking the company private was that he felt like trying to focus on that would actually delay the production of this car that they're trying to mass produce that has already been delayed. And this, I believe, is the car that's going to be most affordable for the public and all of this. So it's something they've been trying to do. And to me, this is Saturn opposite the Sun, basically saying we have to conserve our energy and focus on what's really important here and what really the goal is here. So I imagine after November of this year, I don't know when they're planning on bringing the car out, but I would say after that Saturn opposing his Sun lifts, a lot will start to happen in regards to the rollout of this car and, just this sort of intensity that he might be feeling right now beginning to lift. Now, what's also interesting is that on August 11th, we had a new moon solar eclipse at 18 degrees of Leo, 2018. And this conjuncted his Mars at 20 degrees of Aquarius. Now, basically, he had a new moon solar eclipse conjuncting his Mars. Now, let's go back. Mars has to do with how we assert ourselves. And I haven't said yet that having Mars in Aquarius, you are a humanitarian, you are thinking about social welfare, but you can also be very erratic and very, freedom seeking and freedom oriented, and so much so that you don't care about anybody else or whatever anybody else thinks, because you just value your freedom so much. So when we have a new moon solar eclipse conjuncting a personal planet like Mars, essentially what it symbolizes is that he's having an opportunity to revamp how he asserts himself in that Aquarian way. Because the new moon solar eclipse, what it does is it blocks out the light of the sun. So it symbolizes like that part of our individuality is being eclipsed. And in this instance, it's the individuality related to self-assertion, the Mars in Aquarius. So I would think that it was just a bit of a wake-up call for him, because what had happened just prior to that eclipse on August 7th was when he sent out the tweet saying that he was going to take his company private. And I think what happened with the eclipse is that it really reset how he asserts himself in that Aquarian way, and it can sort of flush out some of those perhaps more challenging ways of doing that Mars and Aquarius energy, which would be independence at all cost, freedom seeking at all cost, and really giving him the opportunity to kind of rethink that. And especially because Mars has been moving retrograde in the sign of Aquarius over the last couple of months, suggesting even more of an opportunity to review the self-assertion principle and making sure that we're doing it in a way that really does include everybody and incorporate the whole. The Astrologer's Handbook by Francis Sequoian and Louis Acker talk about having Mars in Aquarius, and they say that this position produces reformist tendencies that are translated into action. These people devise original methods of doing things and are contemptuous of traditional views and methods, unless these conform to logic and practical experience. People with Mars in Aquarius do not work well under authoritarian direction. They must be allowed to do things in their own way and to learn by their own mistakes. However, they are in danger of discarding the old ways before being able to replace them with something better. Thus, the outcome of their actions can be either constructive or destructive depending on the degree of wisdom and maturity indicated by the overall horoscope pattern. Then they go on to say, and remember, his Mars in Aquarius is squared Jupiter and Neptune. They say that if it's afflicted, which that would be, there can be a desire to overthrow the established order rather than regenerate and improve it. Many revolutionaries have Mars in Aquarius. People with an afflicted Mars in this sign need to learn the art of harmonious functioning with friends and in groups. So I think that this eclipse and the fact that Mars has been retrograde in Aquarius really were stimulating that part of him, that self-assertion in Aquarius, that Mars and Aquarius part of him. And remember, eclipses last for 6 months, the effects of them do. So this will continue to be echoing throughout his life over the next 6 months, and ask him to really sort of learn and integrate better ways of expressing that Mars and Aquarius nature in his chart. Finally, he's been having 2 progressions that also involve Mars in his chart. He's been having the progressed Sun opposite his Mars at 20 degrees of Aquarius. So the progressed Sun has been moving through Leo at 20 degrees, and it has been opposing that natal Mars. That natal Mars that had the solar eclipse on it, that natal Mars that had Mars retrograde going back and forth through its own sign. So just another symbolism that, he's been being asked to kind of take a look at how he asserts himself. Cafe Astrology says about having progressed Sun opposite your Mars that pushing too hard will get you nowhere, and although you may think you should go an extra mile right about now, you probably shouldn't. The urge to make progress and expend energy is high, but the results may be diminishing returns. So step back and take a second look at where you're committing your resources. So it's interesting, this whole year seems to be kind of asking him to look at his Mars in his chart and look at how he asserts himself and look at where he focuses his energy. And is it really about, using Twitter to spontaneously or impulsively express your grievances, or is it about staying focused on really doing what you need to do in order to accomplish the bigger goals that are going to be more helpful for humanity in the long run? And the last progression that he's also had is that progressed Mars has been conjuncting his north node at 15 degrees of Aquarius. Whenever we're dealing with progressed planets, we're looking at how that energy, that specific planetary energy, is evolving. So to have progressed Mars in Aquarius, that's his natal Mars sign. So it's not like his Mars has progressed into a new sign per se, but it is progressing over his North Node. What he's here to do in this lifetime, how he's here to mature and grow. And it's that North Node in Aquarius of thinking of the group and acting in humanitarian ways. So again, it's another symbol that he's really being asked at this time to kind of shape up that part of him that really needs to focus more on everybody rather than so much just the self. And that Mars, that self-assertion principle, is stimulating that North Node desire to really focus on humanity and focus on the group in this lifetime. So this has been my reading of Elon Musk's chart. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like my channel, please subscribe. You can also find me online. My website is highaltitudeastrology.com. You can sign up for daily emails. I have a blog on my website where I write about the daily energies. And I also offer astrological services through my website, highaltitudeastrology.com. Thanks so much. Adios.